A man walks into a hospital in eastern China for a routine checkup because he has a persistent cough. Nothing serious. Just a cough. 3 days later, his phone rings. It's the hospital. They tell him an eye system scanned his CT images and found something that every single doctor who looked at that same scan had missed. A rare, early-stage pancreatic tumor. The kind of cancer that has almost no symptoms until it is too late. The kind of cancer where the 5-year survival rate sits around 10%, because by the time anyone notices anything is wrong, it has already spread. But this man's tumor was caught early. He had surgery. He survived. And the only reason he is alive today is that an eye looked at his scan in seconds and saw something no human eye caught. This is not science fiction. This happened in Zhejiang province in China, and it is happening again and again, in hospital after hospital all across the country right now, while most of the world has no idea it's even going on. So let's talk about what is actually happening here, because this is bigger than one lucky patient and one lucky scan. This is a shift in how cancer gets caught, and it is happening faster than almost anyone in the medical world predicted. The system that caught that man's tumor is called PANDA, built by Alibaba's DAMO Academy, and it was specifically designed to solve one of the most brutal problems in all of oncology: pancreatic cancer. Doctors have struggled with this disease for decades, not because they don't know how to treat it, but because they rarely catch it in time. Early-stage pancreatic tumors are incredibly hard to spot on a normal, low-risk CT scan. They're small, they're hidden behind other organs, and on a routine scan that a radiologist might look at for a few minutes among dozens of other cases that day, it is genuinely easy to miss. That's not a criticism of doctors. That's just the reality of human attention and human eyesight scanning through massive volumes of imaging data every single day. But an eye model doesn't get tired. It doesn't have a bad day. It doesn't have 20 other scans waiting in the queue distracting it. It looks at every single pixel of that image with the same level of focus every single time, whether it's the first scan of the day or the 500th. And in China, this is no longer a lab experiment. This is already live, inside real hospitals, catching real cancers in real patients who had no symptoms at all. Take another case. A 57-year-old retired bricklayer goes in for a routine diabetes checkup. Nothing to do with cancer. Just a regular diabetes screening. 3 days later, the hospital calls him. The AI had flagged pancreatic cancer in his scan. It was caught early enough that doctors were able to remove it surgically. One of the doctors involved in his case said, and I'm going to say this plainly, that you can 100% say the AI saved that man's life. Not assisted, not helped, saved. And this isn't just happening with pancreatic cancer. Let's talk numbers, because the numbers here are honestly kind of insane. Alibaba's DAMO Academy also built a system called GRAPE for gastric cancer screening, and in testing, it outperformed human radiologists, hitting 85% sensitivity and almost 97% specificity. That system is already deployed in multiple provinces across China right now, not in some future pilot program, but today, screening real patients. Then there's Huawei. Huawei built a pathology platform called RuiPath that is being used at one of Shanghai's major hospitals, and it has reduced diagnosis time to seconds. Seconds. A process that used to require a pathologist to sit with a microscope and manually examine tissue samples, sometimes taking significant time per case, now happens almost instantly. And it doesn't stop there. At one hospital working with Ant Group, an AI-powered lung cancer diagnosis system took the early detection rate for lung cancer and pushed it from just 14.6% all the way up to 65.6%. Read that number again. That's not a small improvement. That's more than a 4-fold increase in how many lung cancers are being caught early, when treatment actually has a real chance of working. The hospital's own president said something that I think perfectly captures what's happening here. A lung nodule that used to take a long time to detect on a CT scan can now be identified in seconds. Seconds. That word keeps coming up again and again in this story, and it's not a coincidence. Tencent has its own eye medical imaging system too, and their data shows recognition accuracy hitting 90% for esophageal cancer, 97% for diabetic retinopathy, and 97.2% for colorectal cancer. That system has already helped doctors read over 100 million medical images and has served close to 1 million patients, and it's currently being clinically validated in more than 100 major hospitals across China. So why is this happening in China specifically, and why is it happening so fast? Here's the honest answer. China has a healthcare access problem that most Western countries don't face at the same scale. There are 1.4 billion people in China, an aging population that keeps growing, and simply not enough doctors, not enough radiologists, not enough specialists to manually screen everyone who needs to be screened. AI isn't being deployed here as some flashy tech demo. It's being deployed because the math doesn't work without it. There are not enough trained human eyes to look at every scan that needs to be looked at. So Chinese hospitals, tech companies, and the government all moved in the same direction at the same time, pouring resources into medical AI because it solves a real, immediate national-scale problem. And the government is actively pushing this even further. Cities like Beijing have rolled out financial incentives specifically to get AI developers and medical device makers working together, offering funding worth millions of dollars to companies that can build competitive medical AI models. This isn't a side project for a few ambitious startups. This is becoming a coordinated national push, backed by real money and real policy. Let's actually stay on that number for a moment because it's the whole reason this story is even worth telling. 3 seconds. Not 3 minutes. Not 3 hours. 3 seconds. When a radiologist reviews a pathology slide the traditional way, they're looking at a piece of tissue under a microscope, often magnified hundreds of times, scanning across the entire sample, looking for abnormal cell patterns that could indicate malignancy. Depending on the complexity of the case, this can take anywhere from several minutes to well over an hour for a single sample, and that's assuming the pathologist isn't also juggling a backlog of dozens of other cases that same day. Now compare that to an AI model that has been trained on millions of prior slides, that can process the entire image, flag suspicious regions, and return a result in the time it takes you to read this sentence out loud. That's not a small efficiency gain. That is a completely different category of speed, and when you're dealing with hospitals processing thousands of cases a week, that speed difference compounds into something enormous. It means more patients screened. It means faster turnaround for anxious families waiting on results. And in some cases, it means catching something in week 1 instead of week 6, which for an aggressive cancer can be the entire difference between a treatable disease and a terminal one. Now, I want to be completely fair here because this is where a lot of videos on this topic get it wrong. This eye is not replacing doctors. In every single case I just described, the eye flagged something, and then a human doctor made the final call, ran additional tests, and made the treatment decision. The hospital president I mentioned earlier said it directly. Doctors retain the final decision-making power. What's actually happening is that AI is becoming an extra set of eyes, a second reviewer that never blinks, never gets tired, and never skips a single image, working alongside doctors instead of replacing them. And honestly, that might be the most powerful version of this story, not some robot doctor taking over hospitals, but a tool that catches the things human doctors are statistically bound to occasionally miss simply because they're human. But here's the part that should genuinely make you pause. If a system like this can already outperform trained radiologists on specific cancer types with accuracy numbers in the 90% range and can do it in seconds instead of the minutes or hours a manual review would take, what does that mean for the next 5 years? Right now, these systems are deployed in a limited number of hospitals, mostly concentrated in provinces like Zhejiang and Shanghai. But the technology exists. The results are already published. The government incentives are already in place. This is not a question of whether this scales across the entire country. It's a question of how fast. And once it does scale, the implications go far beyond China's borders. Early cancer detection is one of the single biggest levers in reducing cancer mortality worldwide. Most cancers, when caught early, are treatable. Most cancers, when caught late, are not. The entire difference between a 10% survival rate and an 80% survival rate for a lot of cancers comes down to nothing more than timing. Catching it 3 months earlier. Catching it before symptoms even appear. That's it. That's the whole game. And if I can consistently catch cancer earlier than human review alone, at scale, across millions of patients, the math on global cancer survival rates could shift in a way that hasn't happened since the introduction of modern imaging technology itself. Think about that for a second. We're not talking about a slightly better drug. We're not talking about a slightly improved surgical technique. We're talking about a tool that changes the timing of detection itself, which is arguably the single most important variable in whether a cancer patient lives or dies. There's another angle to this that doesn't get talked about enough, and it's the accessibility side of the story. In a lot of countries, including plenty of wealthy ones, Getting a specialist to review your scan can take weeks. Rural hospitals often don't have a radiologist on staff at all, and images get shipped off to be reviewed somewhere else, adding even more delay. AI systems like the ones we've talked about today don't need to sleep, don't need to commute, and don't need to be physically present in a specific hospital to do their job. Once a model like PANDA or GRAPE is trained and validated, it can theoretically be deployed to a small rural clinic just as easily as a massive hospital in Shanghai. That means the gap between the quality of care you get in a major city and the quality of care you get in a small town could start shrinking in a way that was never really possible before. For a country the size of China, with hundreds of millions of people living outside major urban centers, that's not a minor detail. That could end up being one of the most significant public health shifts of the decade. And this is exactly why it matters that you're paying attention to this now, before it becomes mainstream news everywhere. Right now, a lot of this is still happening quietly, hospital by hospital, province by province. But historically, once a healthcare AI system proves itself at this level of accuracy, adoption doesn't stay contained for long. It spreads to other hospitals, other regions, and eventually gets studied and potentially adapted by health systems in other countries entirely. The early cases we're seeing now, the bricklayer, the man with the cough, these might end up being the first documented examples of a shift that ends up being talked about in medical textbooks a decade from now. This is exactly why doctors and researchers outside China are watching this space so closely right now. Not because they're worried about being replaced, but because the results coming out of these Chinese hospitals are simply too significant to ignore. When a hospital can take its lung cancer early detection rate from under 15% to over 65% using AI, that's not a headline you can just scroll past. That's a number that, if replicated at scale globally, could save an enormous number of lives every single year. So here's where we are. China has quietly built and deployed AI systems that are already catching cancers doctors miss, already reducing diagnosis time from minutes to seconds, and already screening well over 100 million medical images through systems like this. And most people outside of China have never even heard of PANDA, GRAPE, or RuiPath. This story has been unfolding in hospital corridors and research papers for the past year, largely outside the mainstream spotlight, while the rest of the world was busy talking about chatbots and image generators. Medical AI might end up being the single most consequential application of this entire technology, more than any chatbot, more than any productivity tool, because this is the one category where the outcome isn't convenience. The outcome is whether someone gets to go home and see their family again. If this video actually taught you something you didn't know 5 minutes ago, do not just scroll past it. Hit subscribe right now because this channel is going to keep tracking stories like this. The real breakthroughs that don't get nearly enough coverage. Stories that actually matter, not just AI hype. If you're serious about staying ahead of what's actually happening in AI, not the noise, not the marketing, the real developments, subscribing is the only way you're going to see the next one of these the moment it drops. Hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications, and drop a comment telling me if you trust an AI to catch something your own doctor might miss. I read every single comment, and I want to know what you think. I'll see you in the next video.